I'm debunking the second slogan on this sign. Science is real. If you want to see me debunk one of the other 5 slogans, please look in the description. I will include a link to all 5. But for this video, I'm going to be debunking the science is real slogan on this propaganda yard sign. And once again, propaganda is a message meant to manipulate somebody, persuade somebody, but the message has a lie or is deceptive in some way, because if it was true, you wouldn't call it propaganda. You would just say that's just truth. That's not propaganda. Propaganda has a negative connotation of a deception involved. This is the definition I'm working off of. So let's go into the science is real propaganda slogan. Now, first of all, it's a lie to imply that Republicans don't think science is real, because I've never even met a Republican who says science is not real. This sign is made by Democrats, and they're implying by saying science is real that the other side doesn't think science is real, and that is false. But let's look at what science is first. Science is not a thing like Yeti or Bigfoot, where you could say that's real or that's not real. Science is a methodology where you take raw data, you use critical thinking, logic, good reasoning to make sense of the raw data to form a conclusion about the nature of the world, the nature of truth. It's sort of like math. Math is not a thing, it's a methodology with certain principles and rules to follow to figure out answers to equations or different problems, and you can use math to do that. Same way you can use science to figure out certain things about the nature of the physical world. I'm going to use an analogy to demonstrate how ridiculous this slogan is. This is a funny one because it's like if you were in math class and the teacher gave the class a problem to work out, and your neighbor got a certain answer. Then you did the math problem and you got a different answer. Then you compared your answers and you had a different answer. And your neighbor said, "Hey, you didn't get the same answer as me? Don't you believe in math?" And you would say, "Of course I believe in math. What a ridiculous thing to say. I just got a different answer than you. I think your answer is wrong and my answer is right." That's what you would say. But then your neighbor goes around to the whole class and says, "Hey, Sharon doesn't believe in math." And then you're like, no, I definitely do. This is the game. This is exactly what the Democrats are doing. You see the irony here? Just because I disagree with your application of science doesn't mean I don't believe in science. See, in their own slogan, they're getting the science wrong. You can call all this stuff science because it involves critical thinking and analysis. They're getting the analysis wrong. And by the way, this is two-way. The Democrat Party doesn't agree with the Republican Party's application of science. So can the Republican Party say, "Hey, Democrats, you don't believe in science. You don't agree with our application of science"? No, that's also unfair. See, there's a difference of opinion on what the science points to. Two different parties can look at the same data and do different critical thinking, different critical analysis, different reasoning, and come up with a different conclusion. And you can have a debate about that. Which reasoning is best? Which reasoning is most sound? I think it would be appropriate to have a real debate, but the Democrat Party opts to smear the other side by saying things like, "You don't believe in science," which is completely untrue. So let's go into the actual climate science. The problem with this issue is you can't prove it or disprove it. And the reason is you can't duplicate it. Science is best if you can duplicate the experiment that you're doing. Like Isaac Newton, he could do an experiment where he believed that gravity was not dependent on the weight of an object, because that's what people thought at the time. If something weighs 50 pounds, it's going to drop faster than something that weighs 1 pound. And he had a theory that said, you know what, I think no matter what something weighs, it's going to drop at the exact same rate. So he went up to a tree, the story goes, or something, a high place, and dropped two objects, one heavy and one light. And he saw they landed at the same time. So that is proving my theory. If the heavier object fell to the earth faster, it would land first, but it didn't. So he did an experiment, and he used reasoning to say, hey, everything drops to the earth at the same rate, regardless of size. And he proved it. And the good thing about it is you can go outside right now and do that experiment. It's repeatable. So this is good and reliable science. The problem with climate change is you can't take two parallel universes, two parallel Earths at exactly this time, and in one Earth say, we're going to stop fossil fuel production, we're going to stop cows, and then in the other parallel universe, we're going to continue as we are, producing oil and consuming oil and burning fossil fuels and consuming cows. We're going to check back in 5 years and we're going to see what the temperature is in each. We're going to see what the weather patterns are in each. Unfortunately, you can't do that. You only have one Earth with all the variables as they are now. So you can't really know for sure the effect of fossil fuels wherever else they're saying is causing a slight increase in temperatures. So that's the problem. So you have a lot of theorizing based on other data. And that's why you have so much disagreement on this issue, because you can't do an Isaac Newton experiment and settle it. That's the unfortunate part of this issue. But we can look at some things around this issue that will give us some idea. Now you can measure the Earth and we can see that the temperature has risen like a degree in 100 years. And nobody even disputes that. So when you hear Democrats say Republicans don't believe in climate change, that's also false. Because I haven't heard one Republican say, I don't think the temperature is changing, I don't think the climate's changing. It's like Ted Cruz said. He said the climate is changing and it's always changed. It's changed now and it changed before the burning of fossil fuels. It's actually changed for thousands of years and it has changed dramatically. Look at the graph on the screen. This is the fluctuation of the Earth's temperatures over the last thousands of years. And most of that was before the burning of fossil fuels, before human beings were in as great a numbers as they are now. So how can you say that the temperature changes we're seeing now is due to human activity when the temperature change for the last thousands of years had nothing to do with human activity? It had to do with natural factors. How do you know the temperature change we're seeing now doesn't have to do with natural factors? They make the claim that the temperature changes, or at the very least, they imply, they let you think, if you're just a casual observer, they would have you think all the temperature changes have to do with human activity. No other factors. There's no other variables operating on temperature. It's all human activity. That's what they would have you think, which is another lie. It's not true. If it had to do with only human activity, the temperature for the last thousands of years would have been flat because we weren't burning fossil fuels. It's not flat. It fluctuates very wildly. That proves there's other factors that influence temperature change. And I've heard some climate scientists say it's in the sun's activities. The sun heats up or gets relatively cooler in certain times. And this affects the temperature of the Earth. And this affects a lot of what we see in our climate. So this is the debate, and it's a debate you never hear. Why? Because Democrats don't want a real debate. They want you believing it. They don't want you questioning it. They want you falling in line. They want to say, if you don't believe this, you don't believe in science. Something to me that pointed to how political and how corrupt this is was when I saw the Green New Deal, when I looked into it, it's trillions of dollars, by the way, which I think is ridiculous to saddle the American taxpayer with trillions of dollars that we don't have. We're literally $27 trillion in debt. Some proposals were for almost $100 trillion. That's quadrupling our national debt, which is super high already. So we're going to spend trillions of dollars on this theory. By the way, climate scientists thought we were going to have an ice age in the 70s. And they were obviously wrong about that. Can you imagine if we spent trillions of dollars at that time to avert an ice age? What a waste of money that would have been. But if you disagreed with those climate scientists, they would say you don't believe in science because you don't believe an ice age is coming. The Democrat Party propagandists are saying that today. Anyway, that's not the only climate catastrophe climate scientists have been wrong about. I saw an article over the last 50 years. There's been something like 42 climate catastrophe predictions, and all 42 have been wrong. The ice age, the acid rain, the ozone layer being eliminated, all of them have been wrong. You want me to take your position based on blind faith when you've been wrong 42 times in a row. But leave that aside. So what really showed me how suspicious this whole thing is was the Green New Deal. Now, they wanted almost $100 trillion. Most of that money was not proposed to go to climate change issues. Most of that money was to implement socialism. Had nothing to do with climate change or trying to keep the temperature down. So in my head, I said, what? You guys are making it so obvious. You're being so brazen in your blatant attempt to smuggle socialism under the banner of saving the world from climate change. Because if this was really about climate change, this proposal, this Green New Deal proposal, would be focused on climate change. If this was your real concern, if this was your real agenda, who's ever behind this, whoever's making these proposals. But it wasn't. It was mostly about socialism. They're using fear-mongering over climate catastrophes to justify taking all this money and power from you. Because when they take your money, when they increase your taxes, which they would have to do eventually to pay for all this stuff, they're taking your power away. And then they decide who gets the money. Under the guise of this climate catastrophe, for people who aren't really paying attention, who don't really understand the climate science. Because I would say probably 95% of the people who subscribe to climate change theology or climate change ideology, they understand almost nothing about the climate science. But they're subscribing to it because the Democrat Party propagandists have told them, if you don't believe this, you're a science denier. If you don't believe this, you're a bad person. If you believe this, you're a good person. This is what most of the candidates on the Democratic primary stage said when they were asked, what's the most important issue? And most of them said, climate change. That would make sense if climate change predictions were true. If the world was really going to end in 11 years, then I would agree. That's the most important thing to do. But I don't agree with these climate change catastrophe predictions. And other people said similar things like this is so dire. Meanwhile, according to Al Gore, the polar ice caps should be eliminated. By now, they're not. They've actually increased. New York should be underwater, according to ABC News, by now. Years ago, it should have been underwater. It's not underwater. So a lot of their predictions have already failed. What we're supposed to believe in 11 years or a short time, all these dire predictions, we're supposed to believe that. And by the way, why, you ever think about this one? Why do we think that the exact temperature that Earth is now is the best temperature for human beings? Have they done a study to say what is the ideal temperature? What is the ideal average temperature for the Earth, for human beings to live in? Have they ever done that? I've never seen it. I have seen people show that in ice ages, during these low times on this graph, human beings did not thrive. And they were saying higher temperatures are better for human beings. More carbon dioxide in the air is better for human beings because it feeds the plants and it increases vegetation. Vegetables will actually be much bigger in size because of the increased carbon dioxide in the air. The point is saying science is real is ridiculous. It's the same as saying math is real if somebody else disagrees with your answer to your math homework. It's absurd. This slogan and all 6 of these slogans prove Democrats don't believe in science because all 6 of these are bad reasoning and bad critical analysis, which is part of science. So, So in their own slogan saying Republicans don't believe in science, which is the implication in this slogan, In their own slogan, they're using bad science. So if anybody doesn't believe in science, it's Democrats. And to me, it says they don't really care about science at all. They care about ideology. The next one's worse. The Black Lives Matter one, that's worse. That's probably the one filled with the most lies. And I'll go through that in the next video. But thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next video.